taking each other in, but our minds may not have arrived fully yet. So I want to invite us to go ahead and just listen to the sound of the bell. Rest your eyes closed if you would like to. And then I just want to invite us to take in the awareness of the floor beneath our feet and the awareness of the chair supporting our bodies. And as we feel the support of the floor and the chair, what we're feeling is the way in which our home planet holds us to it with gravity. And appreciating that support of the home planet, it's just enough gravity that we feel supported and anchored and grounded, but it's not too much gravity that would feel uncomfortable, that would make us feel too weighed down. And then just begin to follow your breathing in and out with your attention. And imagine that each time you pay attention to a breath, it's helping you to arrive a little bit more into your own body and into this time and place together for us to share. If your mind starts to wander or get caught up in thought, just come back to your breathing again. And as you're noticing your breathing, notice how you're feeling in this moment in your body. What's your felt sense in your body right now? Maybe you'll notice if you're feeling sleepy or if you're feeling wide awake. Maybe you'll notice the quality of your energy, whether there's some boredom or some excitement. Maybe you're noticing the temperature of your body, whether you feel warm or cool or just right. And then what's the mental tone of your mind right now? Does your mind feel curious? Does your mind feel kind? Does your mind feel judgmental? Does your mind feel open? And let us end this arriving practice by, as we breathe in, just thinking the words, may I be at ease. And as we breathe out, just thinking, caring for myself as I am. So breathing in, may I be at ease. Breathing out, caring for myself as I am. And we'll do that for 3 more breaths. Breathing in, may I be at ease. Breathing out, caring for myself as I am. So I just want to invite us back to open our eyes if you haven't already. So welcome everybody, and just notice now if you feel the same or if you feel slightly different than before we did that practice. We hopefully have allowed ourselves to arrive a little bit more fully into this time and place together. And so I want to start off just by sharing that the journey that you're on and the journey that I'm on and the journey that we're on here in the United States of America, there's a lot happening similar. There's a lot of conversations happening around gender and the spectrum of gender and the intersections of identity. And so it's like we're all evolving this conversation together. And it's not just in India and in the United States of America, it's other places too. So we know that we're part of something here. We're a part of acknowledging that maybe our conditioning has prevented us from seeing things as clearly as we could for a long time. The conditioning that we all are under generationally, from our families, from our cultures, it goes back a long, long time. And it's influenced each other. Traditions have been influenced across cultures, religions, countries. And so here we are having a conversation. And I just want to remind us that we all have these identities of different levels of privilege, different levels of marginalization. And more recently in the United States, we're shifting from talking about things in terms of privilege to also bringing in awareness of caste. We're expanding our way of looking at things to understand the concept of caste a little more in our country than we did traditionally. Traditionally, we had looked more at things like the separate identities, like racial identity, and looked at racism, or gender and looked at oppression of women and inequality for women's rights, as well as LGBT rights. And now we're looking at it under the umbrella of caste, where depending on your identity, you have, it determines where you fit in terms of the caste system here. And of course, we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go here. And so this is a conversation that is so important for us all to be having. And of course, depending on our own identity when we're talking about these issues, there's a challenge for how to center it. How do we center these issues? Do we center it from the perspective of the dominant caste? Do we center it from the perspective of somebody who has less privilege? And when we're all in the conversation together, how do we make sure that we're considering the needs of everybody? It reminds me of a story that there's a child and a parent walking along the beach, and the beach is strewn with starfishes, these little starfishes. And the child starts tossing the starfishes into the ocean to try to save them. And the parent is saying, well, why are you doing this? Look at, you can't possibly throw them all in. There's no way you could even make a difference. And the child says, yes, but it will make a difference to the ones that I do. And I think that part of what we're learning is that we want to try to make changes that shift from the idea of who fits into the norm to normalizing that everybody gets to fit in. And I think that that's where we're trying to move towards. So I want to share some statements, and then I want to open it up for some conversation, for some shares. These are some statements that I kind of pulled together around some of what I've learned and some of what I've been paying attention to. So I titled this Bias, Discrimination, and Oppression. And again, I'm looking at it across all identities, and how gender is a spectrum, how sexual orientation is a spectrum. These are things that we know from the research. The first one is there's a tendency that whoever determines the norms determines the hierarchy. And we become conditioned into this and we internalize it. Perhaps a better norm would be to normalize the whole range of human existence and identity and expression as belonging and equally valued. Whatever caste system of privilege is present lends unearned privilege to some individuals based on identity and marginalizes others. And that's very true here in the United States. And of course, in our case, it really goes back also to slavery here and how that has played out generationally. There are 4 levels at which individuals and systems can distribute bias, discrimination, or oppression: the personal level, the interpersonal level, the institutional level, and the cultural level. The personal level includes our internal values, beliefs, and feelings. So an example would be if a person believes that legal marriage should not be granted to same-sex couples. That would be a personal belief. An example from the interpersonal would be our actions, behaviors, and our language. So an example would be saying to someone, you shouldn't dress like that, or you should dress like this, based on identity. An example from institutional would be rules, policies, and procedures. For example, people only use the restroom for the sex assigned them at birth, regardless of their gender identity. And then the last area would be cultural. What groups value as true, right, and beautiful? And an example of that is who is centered and who is marginalized or absent in media depictions based on identity and appearance, etc. And of course, there's multiple forms of oppression that can happen at any of those 4 levels, and often happen simultaneously. And I just have a few more statements I want to share to just sort of broaden the perspective a little bit and to anchor a little bit of what we're talking about. The first one is, and this is true, I think, in most places in the world, that educational, excuse me a moment. That educational environments tend to hold themselves to certain standards of conduct more stringent than those mandated by state and federal law. Even if not illegal, universities prohibit acts of discrimination and harassment against any university community members based on sex, race, color, creed, national origin, ancestry, citizenship, gender, gender identification, transgender, sexual orientation, religion, age, disability, genetic information or veteran status, or any other status that may become protected under law against discrimination. And then, in addition to universities, employers need employees who are capable of working with people who are different from themselves. Individual and community vitality depends on knowledge, skills, and attitudes that support diverse and inclusive work groups. And then the last statement I just want to put out there is that discrimination, oppression, and marginalization not only hurts individuals, it hurts their families. We all come from families. And so based on our identity, if we're being oppressed and marginalized, that impacts our families. It hurts communities of identity, because if your identity is from the community that's being marginalized in some way, it hurts you collectively as a community. And what I would like to sort of expand out and remind us of, and remind myself of, is that it hurts us all because it diminishes human potential. And that's human potential that would have been contributed to the world. And a good example of that would be, many of us are familiar with Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein is known historically for his brilliance and has contributed so much historically. And Albert Einstein, barely escaped the Holocaust. Albert Einstein's family was able to leave and was fortunate enough to leave. And if you imagine if Albert Einstein had not escaped because of the oppression and the genocide of Jewish people, if Albert Einstein had not escaped and that oppression had been allowed to carry itself out, we wouldn't have had the contributions of Albert Einstein. And that's just one historical figure. As you can imagine, there's so many people in the world that we're missing out on what they would truly be able to contribute if we really got a handle on helping to expand inclusion and helping to shift so that there was greater equality across gender, across sexuality, sexual orientation, race, color. And I just want to take a moment now to have you just pay attention after all of these items that I shared. Just pay attention to how you feel. Check in with yourself a little bit. Notice how you feel in your mind, how you feel in your body. We're bringing mindful awareness to the impact of some very challenging things that we're holding together. So just notice that for a moment. What does that feel like? And especially in the body, oftentimes we can feel like this contraction or restriction when we're talking about difficult things. But then also maybe there's a sense of hope that, wait a minute, these are important things to talk about. So maybe part of your system is like, yeah, I feel this tension, but then I also feel a sense of, wow, this is important to talk about. So maybe it's a little bit of mixed feelings. So let's check in a little bit. I would love to invite, I would love to invite just some shares, some noticing. One would be to notice how you're feeling, right? Because that's an honest share. You're just paying attention to the wisdom of your own mind and body. Another would be just to share, like, maybe what was a reaction that you were having, right? Because that's just honest. Yeah. So I want to open it up. And whether you share using your audio or whether you share in the chat, either one would be fine with me. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So, and I'm not sure if I will be pronouncing names correctly, so I apologize ahead of time. So is it actually?
Do you want me to read out the questions for you, Jess?
Oh yeah, that'd be great. And that way you can pronounce the names for me. That'd be wonderful.
Right. So this has been asked by Akshiti Chauhan, and she asks, "Sir, how can an individual deal with an overwhelming sense which comes along as our awareness about the world and our surroundings enhance?"
Yes. I love that question. And it's something that I deal with every day because of the work that I do. I find that because part of my work is as an allyship coach. So sometimes there'll be a company or an organization that is doing diversity, equity, and inclusion training for their staff. And people are in very different places in how they're experiencing and reacting to these kinds of issues. So I find that, and I know I've mentioned mindfulness. Mindfulness is a practice that helps us to work with our own mind and body and nervous system. And so for me, I have to use it every time I'm going into situations where I'm noticing activation of my own nervous system, I'm noticing tension or stress. And so on the individual level, one of the things I do is I practice mindfulness, which involves, part of what we did at the very beginning, where you're just allowing yourself to get grounded and anchored, and then you're paying attention, you're bringing some awareness to the breath, and you're paying attention to the state of your mind and body, and you're allowing your breathing to help you to kind of balance out and regulate a little bit. And then I try to bring in a helpful story in my mind to support me. Because you're right, if we're activated, if we're having a hard time, it's important to start with ourselves and just get grounded and anchored and regulated. And then I try to connect with others in community. I try to have people that I can connect with and have conversations around these difficult issues and what's happening. So it's getting support from yourself, getting support in community, and then always expanding the awareness. So whenever I feel kind of stuck, I try to expand my empathy to think about how is this impacting other people? And so I pay attention to how it's impacting me, but then I really want to expand the narrative beyond just my own identity and really think about, well, who else is impacted? And if I were to center their narrative, their reality, how might this impact them as well? So it's like attending to yourself and regulating yourself, bringing care to yourself, and then expanding the awareness out to include others. So I'm wondering if that was helpful or if there's a follow-up question, because I think that's a good one.
Akshiti, is there a follow-up? You're free to unmute.
No, sir, that answer sufficed pretty well. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Also, Jesse has posted in the chat, and I'd like to enunciate this message because it's beautiful. Title of the wall hanging behind him is Mindfulness Benefiting All Beings. You are perfectly imperfect and you are enough. So that is an important thing that we all need to remember and remind ourselves with every passing day. If there are any further questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Nehula asks, "Sir, how do you find mental stability in an unaccepting world?" Which is actually a question that we all need to ponder upon.
Yeah. So another wonderful question. And I think it comes back to a similar answer that I gave, which is that mindfulness helps us to be grounded and anchored in who we are and in our own body. It works with our nervous system and it works with the stories we tell ourselves in our mind. And so I want to, as part of my answer to that question, I want to share with you I call it a poem meditation that I wrote, because I wrote this to support myself with what you're sharing, with what you're asking about. I wrote this to help me to have mental stability in an unaccepting world. So if everyone will just permit me, I will share this poem meditation. And I want to invite you just to maybe even close your eyes as you listen to it and really allow yourself to experience it as a meditation as you're hearing it, and notice your thoughts, emotions, and notice your felt sense or sensations or feelings in your body while you're listening to it. Okay? The title is Mindfulness of Your True Worth. And I wrote this, like I said, because we do all struggle at times with spiritual, mental, and physical wellness. And sometimes it has to do with having some stress around our own identities and where we fit in, and just balancing our life and all of our responsibilities. So mindfulness of your true worth. Your true worth in this human experience that your spiritual being is having remains constant your whole life. Your true worth never actually changes despite outer circumstances, how others treat you, their opinions of you, how you treat yourself, or even your own opinion of yourself. Your true worth remains constant. With kind awareness, let this settle into your whole being and every cell of your body for a moment or two or three. Your true worth remains constant. Breathe this awareness into and allow your mind, body, and soul to reflect this. Your awareness of your true worth is what sometimes wavers or fluctuates along your life journey until you come back to deeply knowing it again. May you practice each day and as often as is needed, coming back to deeply knowing your own true worth again. Dear one, may you always return to deeply knowing your own true worth. And when you're having a hard time knowing what that is, just remember that you are not alone. Other human beings also struggle with remembering their own true worth at times too. It's part of the human condition that we all struggle with at times. May we resist the urge to isolate. May we forego any form of self-aggression. May we reach out to each other and listen each other into loving, connected presence. May we be friendly and kind in our own minds toward ourselves. Dear ones, may we always come home to remembering our own true worth. And may we all support each other, rise up, and move forward together. That is the mindfulness practice. It's just a written version. I call it a poem meditation. But as I wrote it and as I listened to the words, I let them settle into my being. And if you think about all the messages that we take in all the time, that conditions us. And so sometimes it's important to look for messages that resonate for your own being and support you and balance you out. And if you can't find them, sometimes it's helpful to write your own. Yeah.
Yes, Jesse, that is absolutely right. But at times, the problem is not that you don't realize how valuable you are, and it becomes a greater problem that people surrounding you are further daunting elements to your realization of your actual worth. And that is the actual question that Shikhar Pawar is putting ahead. He asks, Sir, gender identity often leads to discrimination in even educational institutions. How to control that?
Yeah. So in the United States, oftentimes university settings have a center that they've developed, and I know that you're developing this center, and oftentimes it's a place of support because there's an acknowledgement for the need that because of the history and because of discrimination and oppression, there often needs to be an actual center that, and part of that is a way of acknowledging that we want to address the concerns and issues. And then out of that center, it's a place of support, but it's also a place of dialogue. It's a place of, people coming and sharing their experiences. And then from there, looking at what needs to change in terms of policies and support and how to address the concerns that are there. It's an ongoing dialogue. Because we as human beings are imperfect, then of course life is imperfect and systems and institutions are imperfect. There's no such thing as perfection within us, and therefore anything we create, there's going to be a need for an opportunity for dialogue and making sure that everyone's needs are met. And when we talk about how important it is to change the norm from the norms that have been decided determine the hierarchy to the norm being normalizing diversity and inclusion and making sure that everybody feels like not only are they at the table, but they in some ways share ownership of the table. It's a work in progress for all of us.
And that question is taken ahead by Soumya, who asks that, sir, sometimes our emotions can be colored by people around us, especially if you are constantly amongst a group of people, because not everyone is lucky enough to have supporting friends, to have supporting peers. So, how to recognize our own voice and not be influenced?
Mm-hmm. So, yes, so part of what you're talking about, I would call that a mindfulness practice, because you're recognizing your own voice. And part of the first step to that is tuning into yourself. What is my voice? What is my voice trying to tell me? And remembering that part of the issue could be the voice that we have has been conditioned by how we grew up. And then the other part is the voice that we have that is authentic, that is an expression of our soul, the being within us that wants to be free and wants to be equal and wants to be a part of things, wants to be included. And it's kind of distinguishing the two, because even people of marginalized identities have often internalized the oppression. So I think it's an important thing to really come home to yourself and check in, really be in tuned and attuned to yourself in your inner spirit. And you're right that not everybody has the support. And in today's world, it's really important to try to connect in any way you can. I know one of the things that I do on Wednesday nights is I offer a mindfulness for the LGBTQ plus community and allies. And what I have found is some of the people who attend from around the world have shared that they don't have support. I know one time we had an indigenous woman from Peru, and she said, we don't even talk about these issues here. And another time we had somebody from somebody from a rural town in the United States of America where things are very conservative and they don't have a community of support. And so sometimes connecting virtually is another way. And so I find that when I shared that poem meditation with you, I wrote that in mind for people who are experiencing oppression or struggling in some way and not knowing what supports that they have, wanting there to be a message for people to practice first with themselves, doing the best that they can to support themselves in their own mind, because that we can work with. And then from there, that's like a daily and throughout the day practice, right? Sometimes we need to return to remembering our true worth, not just once a day, but periodically throughout the day. I look at it like a lot of times we practice self-aggression and we don't even realize it. When we're unkind in our mind toward ourselves, when we're very self-critical, and interestingly, when we're having a hard time, sometimes we actually give ourselves a hard time for having a hard time, which doesn't make sense to me, because if we're having a hard time with any of these issues that we're talking about, it's important to come back to yourself with self-compassion, with friendly awareness, with a kindness in your mind, because we're working with our own nervous system. We're working with the way our brain gets triggered by stress. When we practice mindfulness, like mindful breathing, bringing kind thoughts to yourself, coming back to the present moment, it helps your nervous system to regulate better. And once we're more regulated, our brain works better. We're more likely to think logically and rationally. So I look at it like I practice mindfulness throughout the day to support me with the kinds of issues that we're talking about. And then from there, I try to connect to others who I feel are doing this work as well. You know, if we can all do this work individually and together to make things go better for everybody and be more inclusive, I think that not only are we better people, but the world is a better place.
Exactly, Jesse, as you just said, it is important to create groups that include people, that accept people. You know, every individual needs to understand that he, she, they have all the rights to be happy, have all the rights to feel included. And all of us need to understand that every human on earth needs to be valued, needs to be cherished. So, with that, Shikhar asks another question, and this is actually very innovative. Sir, can mindfulness be practiced or followed as a religion, as a way of life?
Mm-hmm. So those of us who practice mindfulness the way that I was trained in it, we treat it just like a practice. We treat it like any habit that you're trying to cultivate that supports your wellness. So you could say exercise is a habit that supports wellness. You could say nutrition is a habit that supports wellness. Mindfulness is working with the wellness of your own mind. When we can pause and notice our thoughts, we can observe them rather than just being controlled by them, or rather than them hijacking us and spiraling us into all these different directions. I can recognize that my mind and my thoughts are just mental events. They're not who I am. So things that I'm thinking, if I'm able to observe that, I can be more objective about my own thoughts. And if I can be objective and curious and observe my thoughts, I can recognize when they're not helpful. I can recognize when they're not supportive. I can recognize when they're prejudiced. I can recognize when I have an attitude that might be harmful to somebody else or to myself. So part of it is just pausing, noticing your thoughts, and then attending to it, bringing compassion, maybe recognizing if it's not helpful and bringing a more helpful thought instead. So I look at mindfulness much more as a practice and a habit of the mind than a religion per se. Yeah.
Thank you, Jesse, for that answer. And now we move ahead to another question that is by Shruti. And she asks, Sir, how can an individual deal with dysphoria with positive coping mechanisms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that question comes up a lot because I also run a support group for teens who are transgender. And so often they share the gender dysphoria. And that poem that I read to you is a one that a lot of them have come back to on a regular basis. The challenge with dysphoria is that when you attend to it with your awareness, sometimes it feels even more difficult because it's such a powerful feeling and such a powerful experience. And so part of it is first acknowledging that it's hard, really coming to a place of acknowledging for oneself, this dysphoria is really difficult. And let me just bring compassion and kindness to myself because it is hard. And so that's the first part is meeting yourself with kindness and compassion for how hard that is to have the experience of dysphoria. And that's the first part. And the next part is also to just bring some kind thoughts to yourself, right? When you're acknowledging how difficult this is, what could you say to yourself that would feel supportive to you? And even it's helpful to address yourself by your own first name. So I would say, Jesse, this is really hard for you. What would be helpful for you to say to yourself right now? Or what would be helpful for you to hear from yourself right now? The idea is we don't want to meet that gender dysphoria where we're having a hard time, we don't want to meet that by being hard on ourselves, because that only puts us even more in a place of vulnerability and pain. So the first step is, how do you meet your experience in a way that you're checking in with yourself and asking yourself, what would be helpful for me to say to myself right now? What would feel supportive for me to hear from myself right now? And as I'm sharing these things and as these questions are being asked, I'm hoping that you're taking this and applying it to your own struggles in your own life, whatever they may be. So that would be the first step. The other is remembering that what we've internalized, the conditioning that we have, is a lot to do with why we feel the way we do about ourselves. And to remember that that conditioning isn't always true, that the messages we've internalized, it goes back to whoever determines the hierarchy determines the norms, or vice versa. Whoever determines the norms determines the hierarchy. And so just noticing and asking yourself, what have I internalized that doesn't value me? What have I internalized that might be missing who I am and my identity and my deserving to be part of this human experience in an equally valued way? So just remembering that some of the pain can come from the messages that you've internalized that have been conditioned that don't serve everybody well. And as I mentioned before, in the end, it harms everybody, because when we diminish any human being, we miss out on that human being's full potential of what they could be contributing to the world if they didn't have to expend the energy on dealing with oppression. Yeah.
Right. Right. Actually, this is something that we need to talk about more often, the unconscious bias that we have towards people from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
With that, we move to next question. It is by Jyotika Agarwal, and she asks, Sir, sometimes it becomes difficult to identify our true setting where we actually belong. It seems like we live a whole teenage life figuring that out, and even at the age of 21, feelings like fear and uncertainty take over the mind. How do we deal with this day to day struggle, and how do we maintain positivity?
Mm-hmm. So you can probably tell from my answers that mindfulness really is the way that I go to support these kinds of things, because regardless of what our internal experience is and how it relates to the environment we live in, starting with how we support ourselves in our own mind and in our hearts, right? Because it's integrated. It's not just an intellectual thing, it's also connecting with the heart and paying attention to how you're feeling and asking that feeling what it's trying to show you, what it needs. So much of mindfulness is coming home to ourselves and paying attention to what we're experiencing and then meeting it with compassion. So with what you're sharing in that question, again, it really relates to, okay, what am I feeling in my body? What's my felt sense? What's the emotion? What's there? And then asking it inward, what is it you're trying to show me? What is it you're trying to tell me? And pausing and listening. This is a practice, and we get better at it over time. In mindfulness, we say whatever we practice gets stronger, and whatever we stop doing gets weaker. So if we stop beating ourselves up emotionally, we weaken that habit. If we start meeting ourselves compassionately and thinking what would be helpful for me to say to myself, we strengthen that habit. And because we can't control others and we can't control the environment, the first place to start is working with our own stories in our own mind towards ourselves and how we meet ourselves when we're feeling stressed or triggered. And then from there, I think that the poem that I shared, it's really about remembering your true worth. Because if you think about it historically, people have been in conditions where the society that they lived in wasn't seeing their true worth, or they weren't being included in who was valued. And so historically, people have had to remember their own true worth in order to survive. And we have so many examples of that historically across cultures. So it really does start with us. And then from there, it's about building community. whether it be a virtual community, whether it be a center where your school is, which is always so important. I think of that like a community center where it's a place to come, feel like you're not alone, feel like you have support, like you have allies, and where there can be programs offered like a mindfulness program, for example, where it's about learning mindfulness together and then practicing as a community and supporting each other. Mindfulness is one of the best tools that I've come up with in my life to support me. And as I share it with others, I hear from them as well that it's helpful to them.
And that interpersonal support is exactly what we are trying to give to our students at Abhayam, at our Institute of Law, which is actually opening its wings and advocating for gender equality. And it has become one of the first institutionally recognized societies that also embrace LGBTQIA plus equality in India. So with that, we move to next two questions, which are asking the same point. So I would tell both of them at the same point. Just a minute. Is there... Right. So Samriddhi and Manshika asked the same question. Samriddhi asks, it is said that a clearer mind leads to a more efficient decision making. So can a person become more decisive through practicing mindfulness? And if yes, how? And Vanshika reiterates the same question in different words. She asks, Sir, could you please apprise us if or how mindfulness is different from other practices that are rooted and native to India, like meditation?
Both great questions and points. So I want to touch on the second one because mindfulness is a form of meditation. And mindfulness is really a meditation that involves being fully present in the present moment, fully embodied, and aware of its. I like to think of it as there's a field of awareness. We have this mental universe. So there's this field of awareness. And whatever comes in and out of our awareness in the present moment, whether it be sounds, breath, sensations in the body, or thoughts and emotions, those are all things happening in the present moment. So we just pay attention to them with curious, friendly awareness. So it's that mental tone of mind with which we're meeting our experience. We're being curious, friendly, and friendly meaning not being critical or judgmental of those thoughts or those experiences. It's more like we just want to be open and curious of observing them. So it is a form of meditation. And I would say that it's rooted in the practices from India originally. I would say that it comes out of that. I would say that the way that mindfulness has been taught in many places has been taking the roots of it that came out of India and maybe other countries as well in that region. And what it has done is it's looked at how can these practices work with our brain and our nervous system and our body to help us to manage stress and to help us more skillfully deal with when we're triggered by stress. And so that's where it has become like a wellness habit. And so when it's practiced through mindfulness, it can also be practiced in any setting, whereas some types of meditation, for some settings, they feel that that's a form of religion. And so it creates a conflict. So when we practice mindfulness, we take it just from the perspective of more like neuroscience. We look at just the science of stress and how we go into fight, flight, or freeze in our nervous system. So yeah, that's the way that I would say mindfulness is compared to meditation per se, but it is a form of it and it is rooted in it. And then the idea of a clearer mind, yes. So studies were done at Harvard where it did a brain scan. And they had two groups, and they did a brain scan of each group, and then they taught one group mindfulness meditation. And then they had that group practice mindfulness meditation for 8 weeks. And they practiced about 20 minutes a day, 5 out of 7 days a week. And then they did the brain scan of both groups again. And what the brain scan showed is that the region of the brain in the limbic system where the amygdala is, the amygdala actually shrank in size and didn't light up as much or as intensely or for as long when triggered by stress. So that region of the brain actually shrank, and the amygdala is that region of the brain involved with fight, flight, or freeze. And when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, that region of the brain is kind of in charge. What happens is that region of the brain is meant to keep us safe. It's meant for true emergencies where we need to just get away from a situation, fight back, or shut down until danger passes by. The people who learned mindfulness, not only did that region of the brain shrink and become less reactive, but the prefrontal cortex, the front top region of the brain where logic and reason happens, where emotional regulation is centered, that region of the brain, the cells thickened. So there were more cells devoted to that region of the brain. The brain scans also showed that there were stronger neural pathways between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala region so that the brain could talk to itself better and be more well regulated. And people could move more quickly out of that fight, flight, or freeze triggered response into the prefrontal cortex. So you're right that it helps with clear thinking over time. It helps to strengthen the neural pathways in the prefrontal cortex, and more cells get devoted to that region of the brain. It really, it's like brain health. Mindfulness practice really contributes to a healthier brain. Yeah, that's a great question.
Right, Jess. And there's the last question that is asked by Shweta Nair. She starts by complimenting you by saying that, sir, I love the messages of self-love that you're promoting. For someone who struggles with their identity and sexuality, it really means a lot. My question to you, sir, is that how do we make primary people around us, namely our parents, our friends, colleagues, teachers, etc., to appreciate the way we are and respect our identity?
Yeah. So it needs to be both. It needs to be, as you're mentioning, and as I've been sharing, it needs to be starting with ourselves and remembering our true worth, even when those around us don't. And then from there needs to be a movement. There needs to be this collective working towards change, and especially for those who have the most privilege. You know, and we're dealing with this here in the United States of America. Those who have the most privilege, they're in a position to do the most. And of course, it needs to be together, right? So that whenever you have a movement towards change, it's important to have representation from everybody. And it's important to center the narrative around those most marginalized, most at risk, raising up their voices. But the support of those in dominant groups really is so helpful. It makes such a difference when you're trying to create the change. And so it's not a doing to or for, it's a doing with. There's a term that we like to use. It's called being a comrade instead of just an ally, because an ally is like, okay, I'm in your corner. A comrade is, okay, I'm by your side. I'm moving forward with you. I'm checking in with you with how it's going along the way, what your needs are. I'm willing to take risks, to step out, to speak up for you, but I'm also wanting to make sure your voice is heard. So I think it's really important to be a comrade and to have comrades, you know. And once again, to find your community in any way that you can. Virtually nowadays is helpful because not everybody has that in their own family or neighborhood, or not everyone has access. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Jyotika Agarwal thanks you for the answer. Akshiti Chauhan says the pride heart behind you is beautiful. And Shweta and Akshiti again compliment you for answering the questions. Atul Kumar Singh says loving the better term. And obviously the quote that you just gave, comrade rather than ally. So with that, we close the session, and may I now invite our faculty co-coordinator and faculty coordinator, Dr. Sheetal Kapoor and Dr. Amrita Rathi, to say a few words if they want to. Ma'am, please.
Amrita, would you like to speak or should I go ahead?
Go ahead, please.
All right, Mr. Jesse, thank you so much for enlightening us with the words of wisdom. I really appreciate the idea that you put across, which is something that is the need of the hour, which is being felt across the world, across all the nations, and that is valuing your own self, which is very important. And as you put it correctly, you said being in tune with our inner spirit, which is encapsulated in terms of shlokas that are used in our own country in India when they say aham brahmasmi, aham brahmasmi. So you're a part of a supreme identity, and you have to respect yourself because you're a part of a higher self. So that is very important, and for that reason it is even more necessary for us to respect ourselves. And in fact, your ideas also resonate with the, when you say that we need to respect everybody around, we need to bring a kind of a notion of healing the world around, which is quite it resonates with the idea of, for that matter, Michael Jackson's Heal the World, which is such a beautiful song when he says, heal the world, make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. There are people dying. If you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me. So I must say we are all honored. And on behalf of our Reverend Principal, who's here with us, supporting us throughout, she's been here throughout the session, the faculty who has joined us, my co-coordinator Amrita Rathi, who's always been very supportive, is always there with a cheerful smile on her face, and my beautiful team of student volunteers, and most importantly the core team. I express from the bottom of my heart my gratitude to you for this beautiful session that we've had. It has been, I must say, intellectually and spiritually elevating and uplifting. Thank you so much, Jessie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. It's
Thank
really,
you,
really
Mr.
very
Jesse.
beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Jesse. And the message we have got is love yourself. I think that conveys to all. And we are so thankful to you. It's an early morning for you. So good morning to you once again. But great.
Thank
you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. We can have a vote of thanks. Nishant, Afreen, can we have a formal vote of thanks as well?
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, principal, ma'am. Thank you, teachers. Thank you so much, Jessie, for being with us here today. It was truly an enlightening session, and to all the students that were here at the very prompt timing at 4:30 sharp, it is actually a pleasure to hear you and to have our beautiful students with us who are actually trying to pave way for equality all across the globe, because we know aliens have always gone out of India and marked their presence around the world. So thank you, our respected principal, Dr. Tejendra, and our faculty coordinators, Dr. Sheetal Kapoor, Dr. Amrita Rathi, for always being by our side and always helping us throughout our endeavors, no matter what we propose, no matter how we want to go about it. And lastly, to our entire core team, the student members, Trisha ma'am, Afreen ma'am from the 5th year, Mehula Shweta from the 4th year, Shikhar from the 3rd year, Vibhuti from the 2nd year, Akshiti, Simran and Vanshika from the 1st year. It's actually a pleasure to be with you and to our beautiful volunteer team and our students who are here. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We look forward to another such informative webinar, and we look forward to having your presence. We now close the session formally. Thank you. You might leave the meeting.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yep. Shukriya.
Thank you.
So sweet.
Okay, that's really sweet. All right. Thank you, ma'am. Nishant, do we exit the meet now?
Right,
All
ma'am.
right. Thank you. All right.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Great day, sir.
Mm.
Nishant, a special thanks to you as well. You're still there. You conducted it beautifully. Jesse is still there. He's very
Yes.
sweet to be there. Thank you so much, Jesse. It's early morning for you. I'm not too sure if it is time for you to go to sleep, but you are into meditation and mindfulness. You look as fresh as always. Thank you so much. Nishant, Can we all exit the meet? We cannot exit unless our guest speaker exits the meet. So we'll
Goodbye.
wait for Jessie to.
Yes. Bye, everybody. And thank you so much. It was such an honor and a pleasure. And I want to wish you well. I want to wish you well. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes. Dr. Sheetal and Nishant and everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.